Diabetes is silent. It does not announce itself with pain. It does not come with fever or bleeding. It just creeps in. Your blood gets thick with sugar. Your cells stop listening to insulin. And slowly, without any noise at all, your kidneys start to fail, your eyesight dims, your nerves go numb, and your heart begins to strain. It is a disease that kills in slow motion, and today it is everywhere. Over 500 million people on Earth have diabetes right now. Another 500 million are on the edge. We call it an epidemic. We blame sugar. We blame junk food, desk jobs, and supersized portions. We blame the modern world, and we are not entirely wrong. But the real story is older than anyone expects. Most people assume diabetes is a product of civilization, that it was born in the age of fast food and sedentary living. The assumption is clean and intuitive. Ancient humans ran all day and ate berries. We sit in chairs and eat processed everything. Of course, we get diabetes, and they did not. But that assumption is wrong. Diabetes goes back further than agriculture, further than civilization, further than written history. It is not a disease we invented with our lifestyle. It is a disease that was always waiting for the right conditions. The earliest written description of diabetes comes from ancient Egypt. The Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, describes a condition where patients urinate excessively and waste away no matter how much they eat. The Egyptian physicians did not understand what was happening internally, but they recognized the pattern. They tried treating it with herbal remedies, dietary changes, and prayer. None of it worked because they had no concept of blood sugar or insulin. They were watching people die from something completely invisible to them. Around the same time period in ancient India, physicians from the Ayurvedic tradition described a condition they called madhumeha. That word translates to honey urine. They noticed that the urine of certain patients was unusually sweet and that ants were attracted to it. They documented this in texts that are nearly 3,000 years old. They even distinguished between two types. One that affected the young, who wasted away quickly and died, and one that affected older, heavier patients, who declined more slowly. That is a remarkably accurate clinical observation for a world that had no microscopes, no labs, no blood tests. They were describing what we now call type 1 and type 2 diabetes, without knowing any of the biology behind it. To understand why ancient humans could get diabetes, you need to understand what diabetes actually is. There are two main forms. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. The immune system attacks the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. Without insulin, cells cannot absorb glucose from the blood. Blood sugar rises dangerously. Without treatment, type 1 diabetes is fatal, often within months. It has nothing to do with lifestyle. It is not caused by sugar or inactivity. It is a malfunction of the immune system, and it has been killing people since the beginning of human existence. Type 2 diabetes is different. The body still produces insulin, but cells stop responding to it properly. Blood sugar stays elevated over years and decades. It is strongly linked to diet, obesity, and physical inactivity. But genetics play a massive role. Some people carry gene variants, make them far more susceptible to developing it under the right conditions. And those gene variants are ancient. They have been in the human genome for tens of thousands of years. Here is where the story gets deeply interesting. Scientists studying human evolution have found evidence that certain genes linked to type 2 diabetes may have actually been beneficial in prehistoric environments. The thrifty gene hypothesis, first proposed by geneticist James Neal in 1962, argues that in ancient environments where food was scarce and unpredictable, the ability to store fat and process calories efficiently was a survival advantage. A body that could hold on to every calorie during a famine was a body that survived. Those genes got passed down, generation after generation, for hundreds of thousands of years. The problem is that those same genes in a modern environment with abundant food and almost no physical exertion now predispose people to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. The genes did not change. The world around them did. What once kept people alive through harsh winters now quietly destroys their kidneys at 65. That is not a flaw in human design. That is evolution working on a timeline that does not care about the future. So did ancient humans actually get diabetes? Absolutely. Type 1 diabetes would have been a death sentence in prehistoric times. Without insulin injections, a child who developed it would likely die within weeks or months. We would not see many cases in the archaeological record simply because they did not survive long enough to leave much of a mark, but they existed. In civilizations like ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome, wealthy patients with what was almost certainly type 1 diabetes were described in medical texts as wasting away, drinking enormous amounts of water, urinating constantly, and dying young no matter what was done for them. The Greek physician Aretaeus of Cappadocia writing around 200 CE, described it with painful clarity. He called it a melting down of flesh and limbs into urine. He said the patient never stops making water, and the flow is incessant, like the opening of aqueducts. He had no idea what insulin was. He had no framework for blood sugar, but he was watching type 1 diabetes kill people right in front of him. Type 2 diabetes tells a different story across history. In most prehistoric hunter-gatherer populations, it was almost certainly rare. The diet was diverse, high in fiber, and free of refined sugar. Physical activity was intense and constant. Body fat was kept low by necessity. The conditions needed for insulin resistance to develop and progress simply were not present for most people. But the genes were there, dormant, waiting. The moment conditions changed, those genes activated, and conditions did change. The agricultural revolution, which began around 10,000 years ago, shifted human diets dramatically. Grain-heavy diets, more sedentary settlements, periodic surpluses of food, and growing rates of obesity in prosperous populations all began to create a new environment for type 2 diabetes to emerge. Skeletal evidence from early agricultural populations shows higher rates of metabolic disease compared to hunter-gatherers from the same region. The bones tell the story. Agriculture saved civilization and quietly planted the seed of a metabolic crisis that is still unfolding today. Modern medicine has given us something extraordinary. We can detect diabetes with a simple blood test. We can manage it with insulin, medication, and diet. A diagnosis that would have been a death sentence in ancient Egypt is now a manageable condition for millions of people. But the numbers keep climbing, and the reason is not simply that people are making bad choices. It is that billions of humans now live in an environment that is profoundly mismatched with the biology their ancestors evolved over millions of years. The genes that helped a prehistoric human survive a famine are now flooding the body with sugar in a world that never runs out of food. Understanding the deep history of diabetes matters because it changes how we think about it. It is not a failure of willpower. It is not a modern invention. It is an ancient biological program running in a world it was never designed for. A condition described in papyrus scrolls 3,000 years ago. A condition that may have shaped human genetics hundreds of thousands of years before that. Diabetes was here long before the first candy bar, and understanding where it came from may be exactly what helps us finally get ahead of it.